Hey, we use patterns to get through our life. Say you ride a bicycle, that's a pattern. Like it is a combination of more primitive skills. You need to learn to balance, you need to learn to pedal, you need to learn to steer. And when you put these things together, it forms a pattern of riding a bicycle. Now that's in the core of almost anything we do. If we would always need to concentrate on the most primitive actions in almost whatever we do, it would be overwhelming. It would consume all our mental capacity. But when we learn something, when we master something, we start to form these patterns, and then we can put them together to create even more patterns, and we can reuse them in new circumstances. Patterns are really in the core of human skills and human behavior. Now the word pattern is of course pretty overloaded in English language. Like, you can have patterns in almost anything, like in your shirt or in your behavior. But I'm more talking about skills now in this context. I found actually a pretty neat explanation. A pattern is a regular and intelligible form or sequence discernible in certain actions or situations. It's regular, intelligible, sequence. It's sequence of actions. Now, let's talk about how that might improve your photography. But before we go into photography, I gotta go and show you something with my piano. I think it's a little bit easier for me to explain it with my piano. So let's go over there. Now, of course, the first question is that, does this lens make me look fat? Hey, to me, music is also full of patterns. It is not a linear thing. Music is not made of individual notes put next to each other, but especially contemporary music is a combination of patterns of different scale and different complexity. Let me show you a few patterns that I might use in my music. A simple boogie-woogie pattern. A circle of fifths, that's a very commonly used pattern. And there's many songs that have been composed using this particular pattern. Then I got a lot of ending patterns, the patterns that I would use to end a song. There's one gospel ending that I liked. I don't think it has a name. Let's call it Come to Jesus pattern. It would end a song like this. So then we can of course combine these patterns to create more complicated patterns. Stack them on top of each other or sequence them, after the other. Let's combine the boogie-woogie pattern with the gospel ending. Then I added one more pattern, this kind of a circus ending, if you will. So patterns are all over the music, and then if you master, a full set of patterns, then you can start to add on top of that your own sort of improvisation, melody, whatever you want to add on top of that. It frees your capacity as a musician to sort of do the basics and then build on top of that. Now, in addition to my own playing, there's another important use for patterns, and that is the communication between the musicians. We can exchange ideas or, ideas and maybe even guide another player by suggesting certain patterns. Let's pretend now that I was called in to fill in in a band as a piano player. Let's say that their piano player got hit by the bus and now I need to fill in for the gig. So I go now and mimic the band with this simple little Korg monotribe, one of the most primitive bands you can find. But you know, now this band has as a drummer, and then it has a bass player. And then they say to me like, this is a simple tune, C, F, G, just fill in, and I go. But then they say that, hey, Ari, this is not really a bluesy band. We are a country band. Can you play more like country stuff? And then I go into my country patterns and I might do something like this. So forth and so on. So now, you know, these patterns allow us to communicate. They also allow me to sort of do something immediately in a new, totally strange situation, get me started, and then I can start to build on top of that. Enough about music, let's go back to photography. Like in my music, I use patterns in my photography too. Like I got a multiple of, I mean, you might call them tricks or you might call them tools or practices, but let's call them patterns that I use over and over again. You know, examples like shooting directly towards the sun for the summer feeling, or long exposure handheld of moving objects. Like a lot of combinations of movement. Handheld, long exposure, moving objects. To get action and speed into my pictures. I have a pattern where I push Delta 3200 film all the way to ASA 12500 and shoot handheld. And that's the pattern I use for my winter photography mostly, but also in extremely dark conditions where I still want to shoot handheld. You know, snowy, you know, I made a video about my snow pictures, you know, overexposed to stops when there's a lot of snow and sunshine. So some of these patterns are more complex, some of them are more simple, but they are sort of in my toolbox and I really don't need to think about them to apply them. So anybody can take a good picture once. Like that's just, even a monkey can take a good picture. But to be consistent and to be able to produce good quality pictures over and over again, I think you need to base your photography on patterns. So a while ago I discussed about me trying to learn from painters and trying to, you know, look at paintings, especially 19th century painters, and learn from them. And it's pretty obvious that if I just look at them and not try to identify patterns and ways of working, that it's pretty much useless for me to stare at them. I mean, I might enjoy, but I don't learn anything from them. It's only when I try to extract patterns and ways of working, ways of seeing, ways of dealing with light, you know, patterns of composing, patterns of manipulating your subject. That's when I start to learn, and when I take those learnings into my pattern vocabulary, then I can use them, you know, in my own art. So it all comes from not just observing, not just learning individual tricks, but forming reusable patterns. But hey, there's also a challenge with patterns. Like every now and then you need to break away from them. Like I get tired of my own playing because I hear myself playing the same patterns over and over again. And I get tired of my own photography when I do the same thing over and over again. You know, the safe, old, well-oiled pattern that I sort of fall back into. And when I start to feel that, then I need to break out from those patterns. It doesn't mean that I ignore them or I forget about them, but I start to build on top of those existing patterns and create new patterns using these pre-existing patterns as building blocks. You understand what I'm saying? It's like there is not a size for a pattern. Pattern can be small or large, and you can make larger patterns by combining smaller patterns. If you are a programmer, you know, pattern is like a subroutine. You can combine them together. But you know, it's very important that you master a pattern in your photography or in your music. Then it becomes reusable, then it becomes a tool. It's not just a one-trick pony, it's not just a one single shot that you by accident got right, but it becomes something that you can utilize and reuse over and over again. So to me, I think that thinking about patterns and learning patterns and training your art, whether that's playing, whether that's photography, in the chunks of patterns, I mean, that's really powerful. And you know, I mean, if you want to think about it further, there are patterns for composition, like leading lines, golden ratios. There are patterns for technical aspects, like, you know, my Delta 3200 in ISO 12500 for winter shots, night shots. I mean, that's a more technical pattern. Or you might have a chemical or process patterns, like what I do with my Holga shoots. Holga is a very primitive plastic toy camera. You can't adjust the speed or aperture, so you really can't control your exposure. So my pattern for those type of cameras is then to develop using stand development that allows me to ignore the exposure. So patterns can be artistic, but they can be really, you know, like technical also. You know, it's just the thing is that you need to learn them, you need to master them, and you need to sort of recognize that they exist. Then you can reuse them. You know, and then also in my photography, like in my band example, I got into a new band. When I get into a new situation with my camera that I haven't been before, I better try to utilize some of my predetermined, like already known patterns. If I don't, then I'm like totally out of any kind of skills or any kind of possibilities to nail that situation. It's like if I took camera into my hands for the very first time. So I need to be able to draw from my experience, from my previous patterns. You know, when I went to Mexico, I struggled. I made a video a few weeks ago. I struggled in that new environment to get nice pictures, and I mostly failed. I didn't have enough time to learn new patterns applicable for that situation. Totally different light, different sceneries, everything was different. But in a few occasions, I sort of managed to use my own predefined, well-learned patterns, like shooting against the light, or my compositional pattern of like putting the horizon really low and leaving a lot of empty space, a lot of context, very small subject. You know, those are some of my compositional patterns. And you know, using those in that new environment got me started. If I had more time in Mexico, I would probably build on those and start to build my new Mexico patterns. And then it would be cool to come back to Finland and try to use some of my brand new Mexico patterns in my Finnish landscape or portrait or street photography. You know what I'm saying? It's like a fascinating thought, this whole pattern thought. And really going back to the theme of this video, how can you consistently create better photography? I think you need to base your photography on patterns. and learn those patterns, create a toolbox of patterns, and base your work on those patterns. That elevates your photography to a certain level. It's like I can pretty much play with any band on the level that I play, regardless of the band.
Alright, I got my shit together now. Things are better than yesterday.
It gives me the basis on top of which I can then excel, and I can really start to build my art. If I didn't have this basis, all my energy would be just to fill in the frame or just to sit in a band, but I couldn't really contribute. Patterns, the basis, frees up my capacity to build art on top of that, and therefore it elevates my art to a certain level already before I start it. Gives consistency, gives sort of baseline quality. You follow my thinking? What do you think? Does this make any sense? Let me know in the comments, and hey, I never said this before, I might have said this one. Subscribe if you are here for the first time. See you later.
My mind keeps on turning, keeps on turning.